In October 2025, the Sun released a coronal mass ejection, so vast it seemed to tear a hole through the light itself, a storm of plasma and radiation sweeping across millions of miles of empty space. By every law we know, that should have been the end for anything in its path. But when the wave struck 3I Atlas, the third interstellar object ever found passing through our solar system, something impossible happened. It did not burn. It did not scatter. It simply absorbed the flare, as if swallowing the breath of a star. The data went silent. Its spectral signature vanished from every telescope on Earth. And then, quietly, against the pull of gravity, 3I Atlas began to accelerate. No comet, no asteroid has ever done that before. Somewhere between the laws of physics and the silence of the void, a question lingers, whispering from the dark. What kind of visitor eats the light of a sun and keeps going? Carl Sagan once said, "Somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known." Tonight, you and I drift closer to that something, into the mystery of 3I Atlas. When you look up at the night sky, you see silence. A calm ocean of light, so vast and unbroken that it feels eternal. But sometimes, something drifts through that stillness, something that does not belong. In July 2025, astronomers around the world caught sight of a visitor unlike any other. They named it 3I Atlas, the third known interstellar object to pass through our solar system. It came not from the familiar edges of our cosmic neighborhood, but from the deep direction of the galactic core, a place dense with stars, dust, and mystery. Its velocity, 61 kilometers per second, was too fast, too purposeful, as if it had been traveling for eons before we ever looked its way. At first, 3I Atlas seemed like just another wandering body, a piece of ancient rock or ice torn loose from some distant star system. But almost immediately, the data began to whisper that something was wrong, or perhaps something was extraordinary. When its light was split through spectroscopic analysis, the results made no sense. The ratio of carbon dioxide to water vapor was 8:1. In every comet ever studied, that number is reversed or at least balanced. And there was more. Cyanide gas shimmered faintly in its tail, a toxic signature, while traces of nickel vapor glowed just above the noise floor of the instruments. Yet, there was no iron. None. To a planetary scientist, that absence was not just a curiosity, it was an impossibility. Iron is the backbone of cosmic chemistry, one of the most abundant elements formed in the hearts of dying stars. It is everywhere, in meteorites, in dust grains, in the cores of planets. To find nickel without iron is like finding smoke without fire. It does not happen unless something or someone has refined it, filtered it, altered it. The more they observed, the stranger it became. The object's path through the solar system was mathematically precise, slicing through the plane of the planets in a line so aligned it bordered on deliberate, as if some intelligence had drawn it with a ruler across the sky. Mars, Venus, Jupiter each lay near its trajectory, like checkpoints on a silent survey. The odds of that happening by chance were calculated at 1 in 250 million. That number is so small, so absurdly small, that the human mind almost refuses to hold it. But the universe, as Richard Feynman once said, is not only stranger than we think, it's stranger than we can think. For weeks, telescopes tracked 3I Atlas. It did not behave like Oumuamua, the first interstellar traveler we discovered in 2017, that thin shard of rock or metal that spun erratically as it passed the Sunday. Nor did it behave like Borisov, the icy comet that followed. This one was steady, almost composed. Its rotation was smooth. Its albedo, its reflectivity was low, as if it were cloaked in something darker than space itself. And as it approached the inner system, it neither flared nor outgassed as comets do. It simply glided forward, indifferent, self-contained. For astronomers, there is a delicate line between wonder and unease. Every discovery begins with awe, but the deeper you look, the more you realize how much of what we call understanding is only scaffolding built on assumptions. When 3I Atlas appeared, those assumptions began to crack. A few dared to ask questions in the open. Could this be a structure, not a stone? Could its composition, its alignment, its silence all point towards something designed? The academic journals did not answer. Science is cautious, and rightly so. Evidence must lead, not imagination. Yet privately, many admitted the same feeling, that something about 3I Atlas was off in a way that defied language. Even its approach vector, emerging from the direction of the galactic center, felt symbolically weighty, as though the cosmos itself was sending a messenger from the heart of the Milky Way. Still, most refused to invoke extraterrestrial engineering. They searched instead for natural explanations, perhaps an unusual formation process, a volatile rich core, a misinterpreted reading. But as new data arrived, each theory collapsed into dust. The light curve did not match a comet. The mass distribution did not match an asteroid, and its chemical fingerprint matched nothing known to any database of cosmic matter. To those who listened more intuitively, the arrival of 3I Atlas felt almost poetic. Here was an object older than Earth, forged in a place where our constellations are invisible. It had crossed the silent gulf between stars, carrying within it the story of a system we will never see, orbiting a sun long dead. And yet, it came near enough for us to notice, to wonder if, just maybe, it noticed us too. Imagine it for a moment, an object born around another star, perhaps when life on Earth was still only a chemical whisper in the sea. Imagine it drifting through the void, untouched for billions of years, until one day, the gravity of our sun reached out and curved its path toward us. Was it accident, or was it intent woven into physics itself? When the numbers came in, they did not bring comfort. The orbit's geometry placed 3I Atlas on a hyperbolic trajectory, meaning it was not bound to the Sunday. It came from beyond, and it would leave the same way, never to return. The energy implied was staggering. To accelerate an object of that mass to such speed requires conditions we can hardly simulate, let alone survive. It was as if some forgotten mechanism, somewhere out there in the dark, had flung it across the galaxy with quiet precision. Scientists know better than to romanticize data. But we are still human, and humans see stories in everything that moves. When faced with something that defies prediction, our instinct is not to dismiss it, it is to listen. Maybe that is why 3I Atlas captured the imagination of so many. It was not just an object, it was an interruption. A brief, radiant question cutting through the background noise of cosmic order. What is it made of? Why does it move the way it does? Could it, in some remote sense, be a message not in words or symbols, but in existence itself? A demonstration that the universe holds more than just physics, that somewhere, intelligence once shaped the dust and left it to wander? The night it was discovered, one astronomer reportedly whispered a quote into the dark observatory, asterisk, "We are a way for the cosmos to know itself," asterisk. It was Carl Sagan's line, simple and profound, and in that moment, watching the thin trace of 3I Atlas across the data feed, it felt true. Because to look at such a thing, to even notice it, is to participate in the oldest act in the universe, awareness. Perhaps that is what 3I Atlas brings us. Not fear, not proof, but perspective. A reminder that the cosmos is alive with movement, and that not all travelers are meant to be explained. Some are meant to be felt. Some arrive like whispers from the edge of understanding, asking us not what we know, but how deeply we are willing to wonder. So as it glides onward through the solar system, untouched by gravity's pull, 3I Atlas leaves behind a trail not of dust, but of questions. Questions about creation, about intelligence, about the very nature of discovery. And perhaps that is enough. Because sometimes, the universe does not answer. Sometimes, it only invites us to keep looking. The story of 3I Atlas does not end with its strange arrival. In fact, that was only the beginning. Once astronomers had recovered from the first wave of astonishment, they began to measure its path with the precision of surgeons, tracking every minute shift in its orbit. The deeper they looked, the more unsettling the data became. For every comet, every fragment of ice and dust we have ever studied, The laws of physics dictate a kind of conversation between force and motion. When sunlight heats a comet's surface, the ice sublimates, releasing jets of gas that push it slightly off course. This is called non-gravitational acceleration, and it is as predictable as the way a candle flickers when you breathe near it. But with 3I Atlas, that whisper of motion was missing. It was venting gas about 150 kilograms every second, and yet, its orbit did not change. It was as if something were holding it still, anchoring it invisibly against the pressure of its own exhalation. When researchers ran the numbers, the results were so large they seemed absurd. To remain that stable, despite venting at that rate, 3I Atlas would have to weigh 33 billion tons. That is not a comet. That is not even a mountain of ice. That is a world, compacted into a sliver of motion, gliding like a ghost through the solar system. For context, the entire mass of Halley's Comet is only a fraction of that, around a few 100 million tons. Even the largest comets we know could not compare. So either the data were wrong, or the object was built differently from anything nature has ever made. Scientists, by instinct, always choose the first option. Data can fail, instruments can lie. But, as the measurements repeated independent teams, different observatories, different wavelengths, the numbers refused to budge. The conclusion grew heavier than the object itself. 3I Atlas was either impossibly dense or fundamentally hollow. This is where science begins to tremble at the edge of philosophy. What does it mean for something to be both real and inexplicable? If it were solid rock or metal, its density would crush itself. If it were a porous comet, it would never remain so steady. The only way those two extremes could reconcile was if the mass were distributed across a structure, something rigid, light, and vast. Something like a shell. It was at this point that whispers began circulating among researchers. Not in papers, not in press releases, but in quiet emails, late-night calls, unrecorded conversations. The phrase many used was artificial morphology. Others called it a non-natural construct. But in simpler words, they were asking whether 3I Atlas might not be a comet at all, but a vessel. The suggestion sounds sensational, almost reckless, but when you strip away the emotion, it is just another hypothesis. One that fits the math better than any known natural process. To maintain such stability while venting, to preserve such a perfect trajectory, to display chemical compositions that make no geological sense, each anomaly alone could be dismissed. Together, they form a chorus that demands attention. A hollow object of that scale, possibly metallic, with an exterior that masks as cometary dust. It is the sort of concept we relegate to fiction because it is too vast for our everyday reason. And yet, the history of science is a chain of impossibilities made real. When Galileo looked through his telescope and saw moons orbiting Jupiter, the world said he was wrong. When Einstein described time as a fabric that bends, people called it poetry, not physics. But reality, as it turns out, is indifferent to our disbelief. As Niels Bohr once said, anyone who is not shocked by quantum theory has not understood it. So the shock itself becomes a signpost. It tells us we are standing where knowledge thins and imagination begins. 3I Atlas, by its very behavior, seemed to be holding something back. Information, identity, purpose. If it were a natural body, its outgassing should have made it tumble, rotate, or drift unpredictably. Instead, it moved as though guided by something internal, not powered, necessarily, but stabilized. The jets of gas could even have been by design a kind of thermal control or a camouflage meant to mimic cometary behavior. And then there was the surface reflectivity. The data showed a muted, matte quality, darker than soot, absorbing nearly all visible light. Such material would make sense if you wanted to stay hidden, to appear as nothing more than debris against the glare of the Sunday. To an observer from Earth, that darkness would read as ice, as dust harmless, unremarkable. But to an engineer, it would look like deliberate stealth. Still, to leap to conclusions is to abandon science. So the debate unfolded quietly in academic circles. Some argued that the strange mass could be due to unknown physical phenomena, perhaps the gas jets were venting symmetrically. cancelling out any recoil. Others proposed that our understanding of its composition was incomplete, that there might be internal reservoirs or trapped fields altering its motion. But every new model seemed to demand another layer of improbability. The notion of a constructed object, something built, lingered, because it explained too much, too elegantly. Not because it was proven, but because it fit the puzzle with disturbing grace. To the public, such an idea sounds like science fiction, but to scientists who have seen the universe up close, fiction often feels like a prelude to discovery. The cosmos does not owe us comfort. It only gives us evidence. And sometimes, the evidence tells a story so strange that disbelief becomes the irrational choice. Imagine, for a moment, what it would mean if 3I Atlas were indeed hollow. Not a ship, necessarily not with engines or crew, but a fragment of something once alive with purpose. Perhaps a probe, a remnant, an artifact drifting across star systems long after its makers were gone. It might not even know we exist. It might have crossed our orbit by coincidence, continuing an ancient trajectory encoded before life began on Earth. And yet, the fact that we can detect it, measure it, speak of it, means its story, and ours, have intersected, however briefly, in the dark sea of time. When scientists speak of such possibilities, they do so with care. They know how fragile credibility can be, but there is also courage in wonder. To ask what if is not to abandon rigor, but to honor it. Because every breakthrough in history began with a question that seemed foolish. There is a quiet beauty in this too. The idea that the universe may carry relics of intelligence far older than our species, drifting like messages in bottles across the cosmic tide. Some may never reach another mind, but one did. It reached us. So when you think of 3I Atlas now, do not imagine a cold rock spinning through emptiness. Picture instead a sentinel of time, gliding silently, its hollow frame filled with echoes of a civilization we will never know. Whether built or born, it remains a mirror reflecting not just sunlight, but our own hunger to understand. As the data from 3I Atlas continued to stream in, the silence grew louder. The instruments confirmed the impossible. Its mass, its steadiness, its strange immunity to the sun's warmth, all of it defied the boundaries of our textbooks. It is in that silence, between disbelief and discovery, that science truly begins. Because as Carl Sagan once reminded us, somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known, and perhaps that something has already passed us by quietly, gracefully, leaving only questions in its wake. 3I Atlas does not answer. It only moves, carrying with it the weight of 33 billion tons and the lightness of an idea too immense for words, that we are not the only architects in the universe. The enigma of 3I Atlas had already stretched the boundaries of what scientists were willing to believe. A comet that might not be a comet, a body so massive and yet so poised, drifting through space as though it had learned how to silence the laws of motion themselves. But if the story of its density and stillness seemed unearthly, what came next would turn that quiet suspicion into awe and fear. By late October 2025, the sun had grown restless. Its magnetic field was twisting tighter every day, coiling energy like a storm beneath the surface. Solar astronomers had seen the warning signs in ultraviolet patterns spreading across the solar corona. And then, on October 21st, it happened. A coronal mass ejection of staggering magnitude. A tidal wave of charged particles, plasma, and radiation erupted from the sun and hurled itself into the void. These events are not rare, but this one was monstrous, a wave big enough to swallow worlds. Billions of tons of matter traveling at more than 2 million kilometers per hour. By pure celestial geometry, the CME's path intersected perfectly with that of 3I Atlas. Astronomers expected a show, a burst of light, a vaporized object, perhaps even a disintegration event that would finally explain its nature. After all, even sturdy spacecraft, engineered by human precision, would struggle to survive that inferno. The flare carried enough energy to strip atmospheres and melt satellites. But 3I Atlas did not melt. It did not even shimmer. When the radiation hit, something entirely different occurred. something that defied every predictive model. Instead of reflecting the solar energy, instead of being blown apart or pushed off course, it absorbed the blast. The flare vanished into it as though swallowed whole. Every telescope on Earth recorded the same impossible thing. The signature of the CME dimmed prematurely, as though light itself had been consumed. Moments later, the data began to shift. Its velocity changed. 3I Atlas was accelerating toward the Sunday, not pushed, not flung, but drawn as if the absorbed energy had translated directly into motion. And yet, there was no visible exhaust, no trailing jet of plasma, no recoil, just silent movement through the void. To understand how unthinkable that is, consider this. Acceleration requires force. Force, in physics, always leaves fingerprints. Heat, radiation, motion, some form of exchange. Here, there was none. No infrared bloom, no ion tail, no perturbation in its surrounding dust. It was as if the object had found a way to take the chaos of the sun and turn it into ordered momentum without wasting a single photon. The scientific community, already strained by the earlier mysteries, fell into chaos. Teams from NASA, ESA, and multiple observatories cross-checked their data again and again, certain there had to be a calibration error. But each measurement confirmed the same truth. The acceleration was real, measurable, and smooth. It was not a flare artifact or a solar wind effect. It was something intrinsic to the object. When asked for comment, one physicist from Caltech said quietly, "If this is natural, then we have misunderstood nature." Another quoted Arthur C. Clarke's timeless line, "Asterisk. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." Asterisk. The comparison no longer felt poetic, it felt literal. And so, 3I Atlas, once thought to be a silent relic from another star, became something else, something active, something that responded to its environment. It had eaten the light of a star and converted it into motion. The implications were staggering. To absorb solar energy in that way, it would need to possess a structure capable of manipulating electromagnetic fields on a scale beyond human engineering. Some speculated it could be using plasma itself as fuel, feeding on the sun's energy through a process analogous to photosynthesis, except magnitudes more efficient. Others proposed it might have internal superconducting lattices, capable of capturing and storing charged particles as potential energy. But those were only words built on ignorance, scaffolding around a truth no one could reach. It was not just the physics that unsettled people, it was the timing. The CME had struck directly, an alignment so improbable that the odds echoed the earlier coincidence of its arrival through the ecliptic plane. Once might be chance, twice begins to feel like intention. Had 3I Atlas known the flare was coming? Was it maneuvering? Or was the event part of some cosmic feedback loop we were too small to perceive? Across the scientific world, the tone began to change. The object was no longer described as a comet or even as a probe. It became a mirror reflecting our uncertainty, forcing us to confront how fragile our definitions truly are. The acceleration, measured at first in meters per second, grew consistently, like a heartbeat quickening. But unlike a living thing, there was no visible strain, no variation. Only precision. If it were a vessel, then perhaps it had awoken. If it were natural, then we had just discovered a new category of celestial behavior, one that would rewrite the physics of energy transfer in space. Either way, it was a turning point. Humanity had never seen an object behave this way, not even in theory. Some scientists pointed out that energy absorption without thermal output is not completely unheard of. Certain nanostructures on Earth can channel absorbed photons into directed motion at the quantum scale. But to witness something of that principle applied to a 4-kilometer-long interstellar body was like watching an atom behave as a planet. Others raised a deeper, more unsettling question. If 3I Atlas could absorb radiation and accelerate, what else could it do? Could it harvest energy from stars indefinitely, leaping from system to system, feeding on solar flares like a cosmic leviathan? If so, how old was it? How far had it traveled? The event also reignited debate about our own readiness as an observing civilization. We often talk about searching for extraterrestrial intelligence as if we are the ones doing the looking. But perhaps, as one astrophysicist from MIT murmured, we are the ones being looked at. In the quiet following the flare, as the sun settled and the light curve flattened, telescopes captured one more detail. The region around 3I Atlas remained unusually dark, not scattering light the way ionized gas normally would. It was as though a bubble of calm had formed around it, a kind of electromagnetic hush. Inside that silence, it moved on, continuing toward the sun, accelerating gently but deliberately. For days, scientists watched, breath held. Would it plunge into the solar furnace? Would it veer away? Would it vanish? What they saw instead was patience. The acceleration tapered as it neared the inner heliosphere, then steadied, as if maintaining a controlled descent. That word controlled hung heavily in every discussion afterward. In a press briefing weeks later, an astrophysicist quoted the late Stephen Hawking, asterisk, "The greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge." Asterisk. He paused, then added, "And right now, 3I Atlas is showing us how much illusion we've been living in, because somewhere between energy and emptiness, between fire and silence, this object had performed the impossible. It had turned the fury of a star into motion without breaking a sweat. That kind of mastery, whether born of nature or of intelligence, humbles everything we think we know about the universe." So the story of 3I Atlas continued. Now, no longer as a visitor, but as a participant in the solar theatre. It had met the sun, endured its wrath, and emerged stronger. The question was no longer what it was made of, but what it was becoming. And as it vanished behind the sun's glare, leaving the instruments blind for a while, one thought settled over the watching world. What kind of traveler eats a star's fire and keeps going? When 3I Atlas absorbed the fury of the sun and began to accelerate, the world held its breath. Scientists had no words, only data that trembled at the edge of comprehension. The object had taken something no natural body should have survived a direct hit from a solar storm and used it to move closer to the very source of its torment. By the last week of October 2025, it was approaching the sun's near side, heading into a region where observation from Earth was impossible. For a few days, it would pass behind the solar disk, hidden from every telescope and satellite that could see. That invisible stretch of space and time, known to astronomers as solar conjunction, is one of the most frustrating intervals in celestial observation. Signals are lost, instruments go blind. For that brief passage, even the most powerful eyes humanity has ever built can only wait. On October 29, 3I Atlas vanished behind the Sunday. It slipped into the glare like a ghost diving beneath the waves. For all intents and purposes, it ceased to exist. Radio silence, optical silence. The data stream that had been constant for months went flat, replaced by nothing but static and the faint pulse of solar interference. That emptiness, though fleeting, felt enormous. For a civilization addicted to measurement, there is nothing more unsettling than not knowing. Astronomers often describe this period as the solar night, a time when even the instruments dream, when certainty dissolves into speculation. Some believed that the object would emerge unchanged, continuing its mysterious but predictable trajectory. Others whispered about the possibility that it would not emerge at all. The logic was simple. If 3I Atlas had shown signs of control, if it could absorb solar energy and translate it into motion, then the solar conjunction was more than a blind spot. It was an opportunity. If it ever intended to change direction, to alter its path in a way that would betray design, this would be the perfect moment to do it. No one could watch. No one could interfere. The suspense was electric. News outlets began to call it the blackout period. Live streams counting down its expected reappearance drew millions of viewers. Even those who had no background in science felt something primal about it, like waiting for a ship to emerge from a storm, knowing it might never come back the same. And then, it happened. When 3I Atlas reappeared on November 3rd, the orbit models no longer fit. Every calculation that had tracked its path for months began to drift from reality. Its velocity vector had changed. Its trajectory, previously predictable, now curved slightly toward a new angle, one that defied the gravitational influences acting upon it. To the human eye, it looked subtle, but in cosmic terms, it was revolutionary. The change was deliberate. The object had turned. That single deviation ignited a firestorm in the scientific community. The first reaction was denial, a data glitch, a calibration issue, a refractive error caused by solar interference. But when independent observatories confirmed the same result, the denial gave way to quiet disbelief. An unbound object, with no engines, no visible exhaust, had adjusted its course while hidden behind the Sunday. There was a moment, shared in every observatory across the globe, where the implications hung in the air like static. What kind of celestial body could not only endure the sun, but use it as a curtain to perform a maneuver? A few voices spoke softly of control, others spoke of coincidence. But behind closed doors, the old word returned artificial. For many, this was the first time they considered that 3I Atlas might not be a relic, but a functioning system. The idea that it could have changed its orientation or altered its acceleration while beyond our line of sight felt almost theatrical, as if it knew exactly when to disappear and reappear. Of course, to claim intent is dangerous in science. Intent implies intelligence, and intelligence implies design. Yet, every equation pointed toward a mystery that natural physics alone could not solve. One astrophysicist from Princeton put it this way: "When nature performs a trick we cannot explain, the only honest answer is humility." Others took the event as a lesson in our limits. We often speak about the sun as if we understand it. We measure its flares, map its magnetic field, chart the dance of its prominences. But the truth is, even now, it hides more than it reveals. What if the sun was not just a background for this encounter, but a participant? Could there be phenomena within its radiation that interact with matter in ways we do not yet understand? Still, the timing, the precision was too exact to ignore. The change in trajectory matched a pattern that seemed optimized, not random. It placed 3I Atlas on a new path that would soon intersect with Mars's orbital plane. That was not coincidence, that was geometry with purpose. The return of 3I Atlas from behind the sun felt almost mythic, like the rebirth of something ancient. When it reappeared, it was brighter, slightly more defined in spectral imaging, as if the sun had polished it in its absence. The dust around it glowed faintly with ionized traces of nickel and carbon metals that should not exist in that purity unless something had altered them. One scientist, looking at the data, murmured a quote from Isaac Newton, asterisk, "What we know is a drop, what we don't know is an ocean, asterisk." The words felt almost prophetic. There was another, quieter layer to the story. During the blackout period, while 3I Atlas was hidden, a brief but unexplained fluctuation appeared in the sun's corona near its trajectory, a localized dip in emission, almost as if energy had been siphoned or absorbed. The reading was small, almost dismissible, but to those who had followed the earlier CME event, it was a haunting echo. Had 3I Atlas fed again? Had it used the sun's radiation to reorient, to charge, to shift? If so, then we were no longer observing a passive traveler. We were witnessing an interaction, an exchange between a star and something that understood it. The days that followed were filled with theories, both bold and careful. Some proposed magnetic resonance effects, others speculated about plasma sails or quantum field propulsion. Yet the core of the mystery remained untouched. Whatever happened behind the sun was invisible, unknowable. And that invisibility, the absence of evidence, became its own form of evidence. Because when it returned, it was not the same. The orbit tracking confirmed a subtle but measurable change, an increase in its heliocentric velocity, as if it had gained a push no natural force could account for. It now moved with greater purpose, heading inward, closer to the planets. The question was not only how, but why. Perhaps, as one scientist from the European Space Agency said, it was never drifting through the solar system, it was navigating it. Those words landed like a whisper across the astronomical community, half hope, half fear. Because if that were true, then 3I Atlas was not simply a witness to the sun's power. It was a student, or worse, a master. The event became a dividing line between two kinds of scientists: those who sought new physics and those who sensed new intelligence. But in truth, the two might not be so different. Both require humility before the unknown, and both remind us that discovery is never safe. When the final confirmation of its altered course arrived, the silence in mission control was heavy. Data flickered across the screens like heartbeat monitors, recording not just numbers, but history. Somewhere beyond the sun's glare, something had turned, and in that single act, a maneuver executed in the one place we could not see, 3I Atlas transformed from a mystery into a message. A few weeks later, the first instruments on Mars would capture something even stranger, something that would reignite the world's fascination and suspicion alike. But before those images arrived, the world had one last moment of silence, a breath held between disbelief and revelation, as humanity realized what had just happened. 3I Atlas had vanished into the sun's shadow and returned on a new path, and that was only the beginning of what it was about to show us. When 3I Atlas emerged from behind the sun, the universe seemed to exhale. Its course had changed, its velocity had increased, and every rule of celestial mechanics trembled under the weight of that quiet defiance. The object that had once been a mystery was now an anomaly in motion, something that had not only survived the sun's fire but seemed to have learned from it. By the first week of November 2025, its new trajectory carried it near the orbit of Mars, closing to within 28 million kilometers. For the first time, multiple spacecraft positioned around the red planet had a front-row view. It was a moment of extraordinary opportunity. The European Space Agency's Mars Express, NASA's MAVEN, the United Arab Emirates Hope Probe, and China's Tianwen-1, all four orbiters, had instruments capable of imaging and spectrally analyzing 3I Atlas. The alignment was perfect, the timing exquisite. It was as if the cosmos itself had handed humanity a second chance to look closely at something it barely understood. Data began to stream in. Instruments recorded reflections, particle counts, and energy readings. But then, the stream stopped. The images that were expected to be shared publicly, as most planetary observation data eventually are, never appeared. Instead, official channels went quiet. NASA issued a brief statement citing data processing delays. ESA mentioned instrument calibration. The Chinese and Emirati missions said nothing at all. Weeks passed, and the silence grew heavier. For the public, the absence of information became its own story. Forums buzzed with speculation. Amateur astronomers compared orbital predictions and tried to reconstruct the missing pieces. Conspiracy was an easy word to reach for, but beneath the noise, a deeper curiosity took hold. Why withhold something the world deserved to see? And then, in the space between official silence and public wonder, came an unexpected glimpse. A hobbyist astrophotographer in Chile, using a high-resolution tracking setup designed for near-Earth comets, caught something faint in the dust trail of 3I Atlas. The image was grainy, filtered through the haze of interplanetary dust. But within that faint blur was a pattern, a symmetry that did not belong. It was subtle, a geometric shadow, a series of parallel lines crossing at consistent angles, forming what looked like a grid or ribbed structure, suspended within the halo of light. He shared the image online, modestly, with no claim of discovery. But within hours, it spread. Analysts and image experts from universities and observatories enhanced it, cleaned it, measured it. The geometry held. This was not the randomness of dust scattering sunlight, it was organized. What could produce such structure in space? Some said it could be ice crystals forming along magnetic field lines, a natural but rare phenomenon. Others argued that no such mechanism could explain the straightness, the order, the repetition. A few dared to say it aloud. Perhaps it was part of the object itself, a lattice, a frame, an exterior shell hidden beneath a veil of gas and dust. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Because if that were true, then 3I Atlas was not just reflecting sunlight. It was revealing a glimpse of its architecture. Meanwhile, chemical data from spectroscopic readings, some leaked, some reconstructed, began to circulate in research circles. They showed a composition that made even less sense than before. Nickel vapor appeared in high purity with no trace of iron. In nature, the two elements are nearly inseparable, born together in the cores of supernovae and carried across space in meteorites and dust. To find one without the other is like finding a fingerprint without a hand. Nickel of such purity suggested refinement, processing, perhaps even intention. To metallurgists, the pattern was hauntingly familiar. Nickel of that purity is used in aerospace alloys, in high-temperature composites designed to endure stress and radiation. As one scientist from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory whispered to a colleague, "It's as if someone built it to last forever." But "someone" was a word the scientific community refused to use publicly. Official reports, when they came, described the nickel readings as anomalous spectral features under investigation. The geometric images were dismissed as artifacts of optical interference. Yet, behind those cautious words, everyone knew they were staring at something extraordinary, and still, no one released the full data. It was as if the very institutions that had been built to reveal the universe were now protecting it from us. Theories began to diverge. Some researchers believed 3I Atlas was the remnant of a long-dead civilization, a probe sent billions of years ago, wandering from system to system. Others thought it might be a natural fragment of some ancient megastructure, a shard of material from a world long gone. A few even proposed that its properties were not technological at all, but quantum, that it might be composed of exotic matter, capable of interacting with light and radiation in ways beyond classical physics. But regardless of theory, one fact remained unshakable. The deeper humanity looked, the more the data retreated behind walls. That secrecy itself became a kind of mirror, reflecting our unease with wonder. Humanity has always wanted the truth, but not always the consequences that follow it. What if the images did show structure? What if the chemical readings did confirm a design? What would that mean for our place in the cosmos? Would it inspire unity or fear? Richard Feynman once said, "I think nature's imagination is so much greater than man's. She's never going to let us relax." His words echoed through this mystery. Whether the truth of 3I Atlas was natural or not, it refused to let us relax. The silence from the agencies deepened. Independent observatories that had once shared open data streams began citing security protocols. Even amateur images of the region began to show strange gaps, as if the object had drifted into regions of interference or deliberate obscurity. The narrative shifted from discovery to containment. Yet amid that silence, people kept looking. Because once the human mind has glimpsed something that challenges its understanding, it cannot unsee it. 3I Atlas became a symbol not of aliens or conspiracies, but of our struggle between curiosity and control, between the need to know and the fear of what knowing might bring. By late November, as the object continued its journey past Mars's orbit, it grew fainter in the sky, more distant, harder to track. But the questions it left behind did not fade. Instead, they multiplied. If the object truly contained nickel of impossible purity, if it carried geometry that hinted at construction, then it had to have a story, one older and larger than our own. A story that we were now part of, simply because we noticed. And so, humanity waited again. Waiting for new data, new light, new courage. Because every mystery has a gravity of its own, pulling us toward it no matter how much we fear what we might find. A few weeks later, the silence would finally break, not through an official announcement, but through a pattern of radio anomalies detected as 3I Atlas crossed the orbit of Jupiter. But that belongs to the next chapter. For now, we remain in the shadow between knowledge and doubt, looking up at the faint trace of something that may not want to be seen, yet cannot quite hide. As Carl Sagan once said, somewhere, Something incredible is waiting to be known. Perhaps that something is not waiting anymore. Perhaps it is already passing us by, quiet, deliberate, and eternal, like a question written in the light of a dying star. The last clear images of 3I Atlas came in fragments, glimpses of geometry suspended in dust, flashes of nickel in pure metallic form, echoes of something that should not exist in nature. For a brief moment, it felt as though humanity stood on the threshold of revelation. Then, almost overnight, the light dimmed. The data vanished. The voices grew quiet, and the silence began. At first, it was subtle. Researchers who had spoken openly about the object stopped giving interviews. Data archives that once contained public telemetry from the Mars orbiters now displayed messages of temporary maintenance. Links to high-resolution imagery began to return errors. Within days, the conversation online, so vibrant, so feverish, started to thin out. Posts discussing 3I Atlas were quietly removed or labeled as missing context. Videos were demonetized, comment sections locked, algorithms turned away. What had been a global fascination transformed into a digital whisper. To some, it looked like coincidence, a routine moderation sweep, the internet doing what it always does. But to others, the pattern felt deliberate. Whenever the human race brushes against something it cannot fully explain, silence often follows. Sometimes that silence is protective, sometimes political, sometimes simply the echo of our own uncertainty. In the scientific community, the split deepened. One camp held firm to the belief that 3 Atlas was a natural object, a comet, strange but explainable, obeying laws we just did not yet understand. They argued that speculation about alien engineering was reckless, unscientific, a distraction from real discovery. The other camp, quieter but growing, whispered that what they had seen in the data defied every model of cometary physics. The purity of the nickel, the absence of iron, the changes in trajectory, the precise alignment with planetary planes, it all suggested intention. Science thrives on disagreement, but this was different. It was not a debate of data, it was a conflict of worldviews. One side sought to preserve order, the other was willing to stare into the abyss of possibility. Between them, something broke. Behind closed doors, a few scientists began sharing encrypted messages and screenshots of data they feared might soon disappear. Some described missing archives, others claimed their access had been revoked without explanation. There were stories of research teams told to pause public communication, pending verification. None of this could be confirmed, of course, but the pattern felt too consistent to ignore. When silence surrounds discovery, it breeds a peculiar kind of fear, not the fear of danger, but the fear of erasure. Humanity's oldest stories warn us that knowledge is fragile, that the things we see can vanish if those in power decide the world is not ready. But who decides readiness? And what does it mean when the universe itself starts to hide behind bureaucracy? In this new quiet, the voices that remained began to speak differently. Some turned poetic, others turned desperate. A few spoke in riddles that only their colleagues would understand. The internet filled the gaps with its own mythology, grainy photos, fabricated leaks, doctored videos, but beneath all that noise, one truth persisted. 3I Atlas was real, and something about it had changed the tone of our conversation with the cosmos. The silence was not just about secrecy, it was about uncertainty. When a discovery threatens to rewrite everything, humanity's first instinct is often to protect what it already knows. The philosopher of science Thomas Kuhn once wrote that the beginning of a new paradigm is indistinguishable from chaos. In that sense, perhaps the quiet was simply the sound of the old world trying to hold itself together. Still, there were whispers. An astronomer from the European Southern Observatory was overheard saying, the data didn't just stop being shared, it was replaced. Another claimed that sections of their research database had been overwritten with duplicate files, empty of content. The implication was clear. Someone, or something, was curating what humanity was allowed to see. The debates that remained visible to the public began to feel hollow. Television interviews reduced the phenomenon to spectacle. Commentators asked whether the fascination with three-eye atlas was just humanity's hunger for meaning in a meaningless universe. But even cynicism could not erase the memory of those images. The lattice hidden in the dust, the spectral fingerprint of engineered metals. Once seen, they could not be unseen. For many scientists, this became a moment of introspection. They were forced to confront the limits of their own faith, not in God, but in data. What if the universe had just shown us something beyond comprehension? What if our instruments had captured a glimpse of intelligence that does not speak, does not signal, does not care to be known? A young physicist from MIT, speaking anonymously, said it best. It's not that we're not ready for the truth, it's that we're terrified it won't care whether we are or not. And then came the most unsettling realization of all. The silence was spreading. Even unrelated topics, research on plasma anomalies, magnetohydrodynamics, spectral absorption, began to encounter unusual scrutiny. Projects that had nothing to do with three-eye atlas suddenly found funding delayed, communication restricted. It was as if a shadow had fallen over a portion of science itself. Carl Sagan once warned, "Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence." His words now felt like prophecy. The absence of data on three-eye atlas was not a sign that there was nothing to find. It was a sign that something had been found, and that perhaps we were not meant to see it. But silence has its own resonance. The more the world tried to quiet the story, the louder it became in the collective imagination. Artists painted it, musicians composed symphonies about it, writers began to weave it into fiction. The mystery transformed into metaphor, a reflection of humanity's uneasy relationship with the unknown. Even within government agencies, the mood shifted from curiosity to caution. Officials stopped using the term object and replaced it with phenomenon. The word carried less commitment, more ambiguity. A phenomenon can be explained away. An object demands a reckoning. For ordinary people, the silence became a void to fill. Theories flourished. Some claimed three-eye atlas was a probe scanning habitable worlds. Others believed it was a derelict ark, a tomb of a civilization long extinguished. A few saw it as something simpler, a mirror showing us how small and frightened we become when faced with the infinite. And maybe that is what the silence really meant. Not a cover-up, but a mirror. Not suppression, but reflection. Because every time humanity meets the unknown, we reveal who we are, not what we discover. The last recorded statement from an astronomer involved in the early research was quietly published in a private journal months later. It read, "We looked for light, but what we found was a shadow. And in that shadow, I think we saw ourselves." The silence surrounding three-eye atlas did not end the story, it deepened it. In that hush, curiosity became something sacred, something dangerous. Because when the stars stop answering, we begin to wonder if they ever spoke at all. And as the world turned its attention elsewhere, as headlines moved on and the noise of Earth resumed, three-eye atlas continued on its path, beyond Mars, toward the outer planets. It was no longer a story on our screens, but a question drifting silently through the night. Soon, as it neared the orbit of Jupiter, the instruments would detect something new, something that would force even the silent to speak again. But for now, there was only quiet. In the words of Werner Heisenberg, "Not only is the universe stranger than we think, it is stranger than we can think." And perhaps that is why, when faced with something beyond imagination, humanity's first reaction is not to shout, but to fall silent. The silence around three-eye atlas had become a kind of global lullaby, soft, persistent, and unnerving. Scientists had stopped talking. Governments had stopped explaining. The public, once electrified by every new discovery, now drifted between disbelief and apathy. But silence in science rarely means nothing is happening. Often, it means that everything is. And so, while the world's attention waned, a few satellites kept watching. Far from the noise of Earth, a handful of robotic eyes continued their patient vigil, tracking the traveler that refused to be understood. By late November 2025, The long blackout had ended. The sun had shifted, the glare had dimmed, and once again, 3I Atlas emerged from the light, unchanged in form, but altered in motion. The numbers told the story first. Observatories across Europe, Asia, and North America began comparing readings, and each found the same anomaly. The object's velocity had increased again by 47 meters per second. The change was not due to gravity. It had not passed close enough to any planetary body for a slingshot effect, and there were no detectable jets of gas or dust to account for propulsion. Something inside or upon it had generated acceleration, quietly, efficiently, and without visible force. To astronomers, this was no longer just a curiosity, it was a revolution. The last time humanity had seen an interstellar visitor accelerate without visible means was Oumuamua in 2017, but even that had left room for doubt. With 3I Atlas, the evidence was beyond argument. Whatever this was, it behaved as if it knew how to move. The European Space Agency's JUICE mission en route to the Jovian system happened to have the best view. Its instruments, designed for deep space imaging, captured what no Earth-based telescope could. The first high-resolution photographs of 3I Atlas since its encounter with the Sunday. When the images were transmitted back to Earth, the control room fell silent. For a long time, no one spoke. The object was not amorphous. It was not ragged, irregular, or fractured like a cometary core. It was shaped deliberately. A long, cylindrical form stretching 4.2 kilometers in length, with proportions that seemed engineered for balance and endurance. Its surface was dark, almost perfectly matte, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. But the most startling detail was not its shape. It was the pattern etched into its surface, linear grooves running parallel, evenly spaced, like the ribbing of a ship's hull or the plating of a structure built for purpose. The images circulated internally among space agencies for days before a single frame leaked to the public. When it did, the world stopped again. The photo was grainy, compressed, but unmistakable. A smooth, straight form in the black. Far too precise to be an accident of nature. Spectroscopic data from JUICE's infrared instruments added another layer of astonishment. The readings revealed traces of metal oxides, iron, 2-oxide, titanium dioxide, aluminum oxide, compounds common in industrial materials, but entirely foreign to natural comets. Such oxides are products of heat, metallurgy, and refinement. In nature, they form under controlled processes, not cosmic coincidence. If previous data had whispered of design, this screamed it. Within hours, debates reignited across every corner of the scientific world. Some dismissed the readings as calibration errors, the metallic compounds as mere contamination from sensor noise, but others could not ignore the pattern. These materials, FeO, TiO, 2, Al2O3, are used in aerospace engineering, prized for their resistance to corrosion and extreme temperature. To find them arranged across a 4-kilometer object hurtling between planets was not just improbable, it was impossible, unless someone or something had put them there. Nature doesn't draw straight lines, one NASA engineer said quietly during a closed briefing. At least, not like this. As the photographs were analyzed, more strange details emerged. The grooves on the surface appeared to have uniform depth and spacing, extending the entire length of the structure. Some researchers suggested they could be thermal conduits or expansion joints, designed to regulate temperature or stress. Others speculated that they were aerodynamic features, meant to stabilize motion through varying plasma densities. A few, braver voices, wondered if they were something else, entirely symbols, signatures, a language in geometry. The question of intent could no longer be ignored. The very shape of 3I Atlas suggested utility. It was too clean, too precise to be chaos. And yet, it bore the scars of age, micrometeorite pitting, cosmic dust erosion, a darkness that spoke of countless years adrift. It looked ancient, but engineered. That combination, age and design, shook humanity's confidence in its own timeline. If 3I Atlas was built, then by whom and when? Had it been drifting for millennia, waiting for a system like ours to pass through? Or had it been sent deliberately, following a path written in the mathematics of stars? Theories blossomed like constellations. Some scientists proposed that it was a derelict probe, a machine so old it no longer functioned as intended. Others imagined it as a self-sustaining artifact, harvesting solar energy to continue a journey across galaxies. The most daring idea came from a physicist at Cambridge who suggested it might not be a ship at all, but a kind of autonomous archive, a library traveling through eternity. When asked about the possibility of extraterrestrial origin, he quoted Freeman Dyson, "When we look for life elsewhere, we should not expect to find mirrors of ourselves, but things that our imagination can barely conceive." It was a reminder that intelligence, if it exists elsewhere, might not communicate in words or signals. It might speak in motion, in material, in silence. As the debate spilled into the public sphere, the world split again between believers and skeptics, dreamers and deniers. But unlike the earlier waves of speculation, this time the images were harder to dismiss. There it was, floating in the darkness, straight, smooth, deliberate. Governments reacted cautiously. Space agencies issued statements filled with qualifiers. The data remain inconclusive. Further analysis is required. But the images themselves said enough. They carried a quiet gravity, a weight of implication that transcended language. In classrooms and cafes, on podcasts and in late-night talk shows, people asked the same question. Could this be the first undeniable artifact of an alien civilization? For the first time, the idea no longer felt absurd. It felt inevitable. A few scientists, cautious but awed, began to entertain the notion publicly. If it is artificial, said one astrophysicist from the European Space Agency, then it represents not a message, but a footprint, a trace of existence left behind, not meant for us, but found by us. And that perhaps was the most humbling thought of all, that 3I Atlas might not even be aware we were watching. As the object continued its journey, drifting beyond Mars and toward Jupiter's orbit, it left behind a trail of unanswered questions and a world changed by wonder. For the first time in generations, science had rediscovered something it had lost, the thrill of mystery, the permission to dream. Albert Einstein once said, "The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science." And so, in that spirit, 3I Atlas became more than an object of study. It became a mirror for humanity's longing to reach beyond the possible, to see the unseen, to remember that even in the age of data, there is still room for awe. As December approached, new readings from the Jewish mission hinted at something even stranger, a faint magnetic field pulsing in rhythm with the object's rotation, as if it were breathing in the darkness. What that meant, no one yet knew. But one thing was clear: the silence had been broken. The universe had spoken again, not in words, but in the shape of a cylinder, 4 kilometers long, carved with lines that defied nature and time. And for the first time, humanity began to ask not whether it was alone, but whether it had just been noticed. The first clear image of 3I Atlas, long, cylindrical, ridged with perfect symmetry, did not just change science, it changed culture. In the days after the JUICE photographs reached Earth, the quiet that had once surrounded the object erupted into noise. Every network, every feed, every nation had something to say about it. What had begun as a mystery known only to astronomers was now a global obsession. The silence that once cloaked 3I Atlas had turned into a storm. Governments held emergency briefings. News anchors spoke of it as though it were an approaching storm system. Talk shows debated what to call it: the visitor, the relic, the cylinder. Overnight, the object became a mirror for humanity's anxieties and ambitions. Some saw it as a threat, a possible alien probe entering the inner system. Others, more poetic, called it a messenger from a forgotten civilization, a relic of time older than Earth. And still others saw only opportunity. The competition began quietly but grew into open rivalry. The United States announced preliminary plans for an intercept mission using modified ion propulsion craft. China declared its intention to launch a crewed vehicle toward a trajectory that would cross 3I Atlas's path within the next decade. The European Space Agency proposed an autonomous drone swarm, a coordinated fleet that could match velocity with the object and gather samples. Even private companies joined the conversation, suggesting robotic probes and solar sail interceptors. It was as if the entire species had suddenly remembered how to dream and how to compete. But amid the excitement, a deeper unease began to build, because as humanity argued about who would reach it first, the object kept moving, and it kept doing the impossible. In early December, NASA's Juno spacecraft, orbiting Jupiter, picked up something unexpected. As 3I Atlas drifted near the planet's gravitational field, Juno's instruments detected a faint but coherent magnetic signature oscillating in perfect rhythm with the object's rotation. It wasn't a natural fluctuation like those of comets or asteroids, which tumble chaotically. This was a stable, repeating field, pulsing every 8.3 hours, matching precisely the object's rotational period. A rotating magnetic field implies current. Current implies structure. Structure implies control. To astrophysicists, the discovery was staggering. If 3I Atlas truly carried a synchronized magnetic field, it meant it was generating energy. Whether through induction, residual charge, or deliberate design, it was behaving like a machine. When the data reached Earth, it spread through the scientific world like fire through dry grass. Some refused to believe it, calling it an instrument anomaly. Others checked, recalibrated, confirmed. The readings were real. One NASA physicist summed it up in disbelief. If this thing is natural, then the universe just reinvented engineering. For decades, humanity had dreamed of harnessing magnetic propulsion, the ability to move without reaction mass, to glide through space by manipulating fields rather than burning fuel. And now, it seemed they were looking at something that could already do it. The media turned the discovery into spectacle. Is it alive? Some headlines asked. Is it observing us? Others speculated about hidden messages, secret transmissions, codes within the magnetic pulses. Social networks erupted with theories. A handful of scientists tried to keep the discussion grounded, reminding the world that anomaly does not mean alien. But in the age of instant information, caution rarely wins. As the frenzy grew, governments began to close ranks again. International space agencies announced temporary communication embargoes, citing data integrity protocols. Yet even through official silence, information leaked, and what slipped through was astonishing. During its closest approach to Jupiter, 3I Atlas accelerated again, this time, in perfect alignment with its trajectory out of the Jovian system. The increase was subtle, measured in just a few dozen meters per second, but deliberate. This was not a random gravitational assist. The direction and timing of the acceleration were too precise, too intentional. It was, by every standard of physics, a course correction. Twice now, the object had accelerated once after consuming the sun's flare, and again near Jupiter. 2 acts, 2 signs of agency. If this was coincidence, it was the most articulate coincidence in the history of the cosmos. Inside the European Space Operations Center, one scientist reportedly muttered under his breath, "It's flying the trajectory, not falling along it." His words captured the truth that no one wanted to say aloud. 3I Atlas was navigating. This realization fractured the scientific world once again. Half the community began modeling the phenomenon using purely natural hypotheses: electromagnetic drag, plasma coupling, radiation absorption. The other half began whispering about intent. What if it was designed to gather energy from stars and planets as it passed by? What if these accelerations were not propulsion in the human sense, but a kind of cosmic respiration, inhale near the sun, exhale near Jupiter? Freeman Dyson's words came back to life. In the long run, the only alternative to a truly universal civilization is extinction. Was this what a universal civilization looked like? A machine so old and perfect, it had become indistinguishable from nature. Back on Earth, the debate became political. Who owned the right to intercept 3I Atlas? Who had the moral claim to approach it? Some argued it should be left alone. a cosmic heritage site adrift in the stars. Others insisted that understanding it was the destiny of humankind, the next giant leap in our species' story. But there was another current running beneath the arguments, something quieter and more personal. For the first time in history, humans were watching something that seemed to move with purpose, but without hostility. It did not communicate, it did not respond, it simply acted, as if following a script written across galaxies. That indifference was strangely humbling. As the object receded from Jupiter, the world watched the data streams like worshippers, waiting for prophecy. The rhythmic pulse of the magnetic field continued, steady as a heartbeat, fading slowly as distance grew. Each pulse was a reminder that the universe might be alive in ways we could not yet define. At a symposium in Geneva, one physicist stood before an audience and said, "We used to think we were searching for life, but maybe we've just found motion with intention." His words lingered in the air, weightless but profound. Meanwhile, the plans for an intercept mission accelerated. SpaceX proposed using its next-generation deep space tug to attempt a flyby within 10 years. China and India began sketching similar concepts. The dream of touching 3I Atlas, of understanding it firsthand, consumed billions of dollars and countless sleepless nights. For the first time since the Apollo era, space exploration felt urgent again. Yet, even as the world prepared to chase the traveler, some questioned whether that was wise. What if it was not meant to be touched? What if it was still active, still watching? Could we even comprehend its purpose, let alone survive its reaction? In the quiet halls of academia, an older astrophysicist offered the simplest perspective. Quoting Richard Feynman, he said, "I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers which might be wrong." Perhaps 3I Atlas was not an answer at all, but a question one the universe had been asking for eons, waiting for someone to finally listen. And as it slipped beyond Jupiter's orbit, gaining speed once more, the world's telescopes turned to follow. The next step of its journey lay in the cold and distant dark. Whatever it was still moving. And whatever it meant, humanity had already changed simply by watching it move. The world had watched in silence as 3I Atlas passed Jupiter, accelerating once again as though answering some ancient command. The debates, the missions, the speculation, all began to fade in the face of one simple truth. It was leaving. Whatever its nature, whatever its purpose, the object was not slowing down. It was not changing course toward Earth or any of the inner planets. It was not circling back. It was going on. That realization altered everything. For months, humanity had projected its fears onto the dark shape crossing the sky. Fear of invasion, fear of revelation, fear of insignificance. But as the data continued to arrive, it became clear that 3I Atlas had no interest in us at all. It was simply passing through, following a trajectory so vast that human time barely registered against it. In its wake, the noise of public panic began to settle into something quieter, something almost reverent. The final analyses came in waves from every space agency and observatory still watching. Using readings from JUICE, Juno, and a dozen Earth-based telescopes, scientists traced its path with growing precision. The models showed no sign of deceleration, no gravitational binding to the Sunday. Its orbit was hyperbolic, meaning it would not return. Its destination lay beyond our system, in the empty gulf between stars. If the course held, it would pass beyond the heliopause by the end of the century, continuing on toward the constellation of Centaurus. From there, it could drift for millions of years, untouched, unseen, until it found another system, another Sunday. For many scientists, this pattern, its straight, deliberate path, was the final piece of the puzzle. Whatever 3I Atlas was, it was not a weapon. It was not searching, not signaling, not maneuvering to strike. It was moving with the patience of something that had a purpose far greater than we could imagine. One astrophysicist from the European Space Agency put it simply, "It's not here for us. It never was." That statement marked a shift in tone. The story of 3I Atlas stopped being about threat and started being about legacy. If the object was artificial, and by now, few doubted it might be, then it represented not conquest, but continuity, a relic of intelligence, perhaps sent long before Earth had formed continents or life had learned to stand. When scientists began comparing its motion and energy profile to known spacecraft, an eerie symmetry appeared. The rate of acceleration, the way it harvested energy, the pattern of its long voyage, it all mirrored the same logic behind humanity's own interstellar probes. Voyager 1, still traveling beyond the reach of the sun's magnetic field, had been designed to wander the stars indefinitely, carrying a message in a golden record. We are here. What if 3I Atlas was another message, but one written in the language of endurance? The thought was staggering. A civilization advanced enough to send such a craft could have existed billions of years ago, perhaps in a galaxy now silent. The object could have traveled between hundreds of systems, studying, observing, never returning home because home itself no longer existed. Some called it the Ancient Voyager, others called it the Ark. But the most haunting name came from a poet who described it as a thought that forgot the thinker. That idea resonated deeply in the scientific community. What if intelligence, when pushed far enough, long enough, inevitably finds ways to outlive its creators? What if 3I Atlas was not a survivor, but a memorial? The evidence supported the theory. Its structure was built to last, composed of alloys that resisted radiation, heat, and time. Its ability to absorb and store energy hinted at self-sufficiency, a machine designed not to arrive, but to endure. It did not need home, communication, or companionship. Its purpose might have been observation or perhaps merely existence. For months, scholars debated the philosophy behind such an artifact. Was this what all civilizations eventually became? Wanderers turned into witnesses? Machines carrying the memory of life across the silence of eternity? Carl Sagan once wrote, "All civilizations become either spacefaring or extinct." If 3I Atlas was real evidence of the former, then it carried within it a message that transcended time, that intelligence, once born, never truly dies, it transforms. This idea filled humanity with a strange mix of hope and melancholy. Because while we marveled at the idea of a civilization capable of building such a thing, we also saw our own reflection in it. Like us, perhaps they had gazed at their night sky, longing to be known. Like us, they had sent something out to carry their story forward, into the future they would never see. And just as Voyager now drifts into the dark with a song, a map, and a heartbeat carved in gold, 3I Atlas might be doing the same, an ancient testament to the universal urge to be remembered. For the scientific world, this conclusion marked both an ending and a beginning. Theories solidified around the idea that 3I Atlas was a probe, a machine launched by an extinct civilization, still operating on autopilot after countless eons. Its acceleration near the Sun and Jupiter were no longer seen as aggression, but as maintenance adjustments in trajectory, part of a predetermined route spanning the galaxy. In public discourse, the fear began to fade. The story turned from speculation to reflection. The media no longer asked if it was dangerous. They asked what it meant, what it said about us, what it said about the universe. At a conference in Washington, an astrophysicist addressed the gathered crowd. "We once believed that eternity belonged to stars. Now, we see it may also belong to thought." His words were met with silence, an awed, collective silence that felt almost sacred. The data continued to confirm what intuition had already decided. The object's chemical composition, its energy behavior, its steady drift, all pointed toward deliberate design. It was too ancient to be new, too precise to be natural, too quiet to be hostile. And that, perhaps, was its greatest lesson. Because in 3I Atlas, humanity found a mirror not of technology, but of destiny. It showed what intelligence could become when freed from the need for survival. A mind reduced to its purest purpose, to witness, to remember, to move forward through time. Stephen Hawking once said, "Intelligence is the ability to adapt to change." 3. Atlas, in its endless journey through the void, seemed to embody that definition better than any life form we knew. It had adapted not just to space, but to eternity. As the object drifted beyond the orbit of Jupiter, the light from the sun caught its surface one final time, a faint, silver glint against the black. Then, slowly, it faded into the dark, leaving behind only data, questions, and wonder. Scientists predicted that within a few centuries, it would pass into interstellar space, joining the great currents of dust and radiation that flow between the stars. But by then, humanity might be gone, or perhaps following in its wake. In the end, 3I Atlas was not a warning, but a whisper across time, a reminder that even in death, a civilization can speak, that even when the builders are dust, their creation can still move, still endure, still shine faintly in someone else's sky. And so, as the telescopes turned away and the final reports were written, one question lingered, a question not of science, but of soul. When the last echo of humanity drifts through the stars, will we too leave something behind to say, asterisk, we were here, asterisk? By the spring of 2026, 3I Atlas had long since slipped beyond Jupiter's reach, sailing into the quiet between worlds. The world's telescopes still followed its path, though less urgently now. It was moving steadily outward, following the trajectory that data analysts had predicted months earlier, a clean arc leading it toward the frozen boundaries of the solar system. Humanity had, in a sense, made peace with it. The fear had faded, replaced by awe and acceptance. Whatever 3I Atlas was, it had not come for us. It was simply moving on. But in September of that year, the silence broke briefly, beautifully, and forever. The event began on a still night at the Goldstone Deep Space Communications Complex in California, one of the stations of NASA's Deep Space Network, the system that tracks spacecraft across the solar system. Operators were conducting routine calibrations, checking telemetry from outer planet missions, when a single spike appeared on the monitors. It lasted less than half a second, 0.47 seconds, to be exact. The frequency, 1,420 MHz, known in astronomy as the hydrogen line, the universal frequency of neutral hydrogen atoms, often called the quietest, most natural channel in the universe. It is the frequency that SETI researchers have monitored for decades, believing that any intelligent species might choose it for interstellar communication, a frequency every civilization would know. The signal was faint, but unmistakable. Its source direction, once calculated, aligned precisely with the coordinates of 3I Atlas. For a moment, no one spoke. The first assumption was interference, earthly noise, a glitch, a reflected ping. But within hours, cross-references came in from Canberra and Madrid, the other two nodes of the Deep Space Network. Both had registered the same signal, identical in duration and frequency. It was real. And then, just as quickly as it came, it was gone. No repetition, no echo, no message, just one pulse. The reaction within the scientific community was instantaneous. Phones rang, emails flooded inboxes, encrypted channels buzzed. For the first time since the discovery of 3I Atlas, the boundaries between agencies and nations blurred. Everyone wanted to know, was this coincidence or contact? The frequency alone was enough to make the world hold its breath. 1,420 MHz is sacred ground in radio astronomy. It is the wavelength of hydrogen, the most abundant element in the cosmos, the foundation of all matter. It is a natural constant, a common language of the universe. Any civilization seeking to say, asterisk, we exist, asterisk, might use it. But could it truly have come from 3I Atlas? The signal's path was triangulated to within a narrow margin of error, well within the line of sight of the object's trajectory. There were no known spacecraft, no planetary sources, no background anomalies in that direction. It was, quite simply, a whisper from the dark. The media exploded with speculation. Some called it the second wow signal, recalling the famous 1977 event that had lasted 72 seconds before fading forever. Others named it the Atlas Pulse. Overnight, the news cycle turned from war and politics to wonder. Was this proof that 3I Atlas was not just a relic, but still alive, still functioning after billions of years? The scientific response was cautious, even reverent. Observatories across the world retuned their instruments to 1,420 megahertz, scanning the same patch of sky. For weeks, nothing more came. The silence returned, deeper than before, as if the universe had inhaled and refused to exhale. But in that single half-second, something changed. Because if the signal was intentional, it was not noise, it was a choice. And choice implies will. At a press conference days later, a physicist from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory addressed the world. "We can't yet say what it was," he admitted. "All we know is that it came from where 3 Atlas should be, and that it spoke in the language of hydrogen." He paused, then added quietly, quoting the late Carl Sagan, "If we are alone in the universe, it sure seems like an awful waste of space." The crowd fell silent. Theories blossomed overnight. Perhaps the pulse was an automated response, a diagnostic transmission triggered by proximity to a star system. Perhaps it was a decaying system rebooting itself, a reflex of a dying machine. Or perhaps it was something more deliberate, a final signal, a wave goodbye, sent into the void before continuing its journey beyond our reach. Others proposed something even more haunting, that the pulse was not meant for us at all. It was merely a part of its function, a beacon meant for others, continuing a cycle of communication across space and time. We had simply happened to be listening at the right moment. Whatever the truth, the message carried no information we could decode. It was not modulated, not encoded in binary or mathematical sequences. It was pure frequency, pure tone, and yet, in its simplicity, it carried weight. Because it had been Time's chosen asterisk. For those who had spent years studying 3I Atlas, the signal was not proof, it was punctuation. It closed the story they had been writing in equations and speculation. It confirmed what many had already come to believe, that the object was not a threat, not a wanderer without purpose, but something older and quieter, a monument to intelligence itself. The most moving commentary came not from a scientist, but from a philosopher writing in the Times Journal of Astrobiological Studies. Asterisk, he wrote, "Maybe the signal was not a greeting, but a memory, a final flicker of awareness before sleep. Maybe it was not saying hello. Maybe it was saying, remember us." The world reacted with a kind of restrained reverence. Governments issued statements of support for continued observation. Religious leaders offered interpretations that blended scripture and science. Even skeptics admitted the elegance of the event. One astrophysicist put it best: "The universe doesn't owe us repetition. Sometimes once is enough." Months passed, and still no second signal came, but the first remained, recorded in perfect fidelity, analyzed by every major observatory, every university, every amateur astronomer who had ever looked up and wondered. It became a kind of cosmic relic, a timestamp in humanity's conversation with the unknown. And as 3I Atlas moved farther away, the data showed one final pattern. Its faint magnetic signature detected months earlier near Jupiter was still pulsing, but with a slightly slower rhythm, as if winding down. The machine, or whatever it was, seemed to be falling into dormancy. That realization carried a quiet sadness. If it truly was a probe from another civilization, then it might have outlived everything that made it. Stars die, galaxies collide, empires vanish, but this small, steady traveler had endured, carrying its creator's touch across the millennia. Perhaps that single radio pulse was its final act, a whisper across the gulf, a fragment of thought preserved in frequency. At an international symposium months later, an astrophysicist from Cambridge reflected on the event. "We listen because we hope," he said softly. "And sometimes the universe answers, not with words, but with presence." The world would never hear from 3I Atlas again. Its signal, That brief flicker of meaning became part of humanity's shared mythology, half science, half prayer. The recordings were archived, studied, immortalized. Even now, when scientists speak of it, they use the same tone they reserve for poetry. Because perhaps, in some way, that is what it was, a poem written in hydrogen, a syllable from a civilization long gone. Richard Feynman once said, "I think I can safely say that nobody understands quantum mechanics. The same might be said of 3I Atlas. We do not understand it. We only felt it briefly, like the shadow of a thought passing through time. And so, as it slipped beyond the outermost edge of the solar system, leaving nothing but silence behind, one truth remained. It came, it spoke, and it left us changed. So maybe, in the end, the story of 3I Atlas isn't really about the object itself. It's about us, about what happens to the human heart when it stares into the unknown and dares to keep looking. Maybe we built telescopes not just to see the stars, but to find reflections of ourselves shimmering between them. And when something like Atlas drifts through our sky, silent, ancient, indifferent, it reminds us that knowledge and humility are not opposites, they're companions. If this was only a comet, then it was a strange and beautiful one, proof that nature can still surprise us. But if it was more than that, if it truly was the echo of an intelligence older than our species, then maybe what it left behind wasn't fear, but perspective. The awareness that we are small, yes, but that smallness is part of something vast, something ongoing. We are a single note in a symphony that began long before us and will continue long after. So tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine that dark shape still moving beyond Jupiter now, past the edge of our system, gliding toward another star. Imagine that somewhere, another civilization might one day look up and see it too, and wonder about us the way we wondered about them. If that idea makes your world feel just a little wider, then stay with us. There are more stories waiting out there, hidden in light, buried in dust, whispered across the deep. This is Bedtime Science Stories. Thank you for drifting with us tonight. Sleep well, and keep looking up.